obviously a person who holds a patent is entitled to a return. Not just a return, but a fair return on his investment, right? At the same time, a person who is the user of the drug and who doesn't have the economic capacity to pay is also entitled to the use of that drug, right? And it's not that there is a mismatch between the two. I think parties at both ends have to move together. We at our end to give him as good a return as possible, and they at that end to ensure that the drug is available to the poor at affordable prices.
Ironically, for the country that pioneered affordable drugs, the rising price of medicines comes at a time when India may be about to need them more than ever before. India may be on the brink of a health disaster.
The HIV/AIDS pandemic is a global problem. Today, it's most serious in southern Africa, but the epicenter, the center of gravity, is moving to Asia inexorably. And the two biggest epidemics in the world are very likely to become India and China. So India has a huge need to try and curtail and avert now what is a rapidly expanding and serious epidemic among 1 billion people.
If true, the Indian government's response is not encouraging.
There is no health crisis as such in India. See, compared to other countries, you see the prevalence rate. India, for a lot of diseases, is much, much lower than most other countries. But due to the sheer population, the numbers are there. But the prevalence is, example, HIV. The prevalence of HIV in the country is just 0.91%, where the prevalence rate in South Africa is 23%, Zimbabwe is 26%, Botswana is 37%, and from some neighboring countries like Thailand was at one time 16%. So compared to that, India just 0.91% is just nothing.
For over 15 years, India has been largely self-sufficient as a manufacturer of generic pharmaceuticals. Low costs means it's also been a major supplier of affordable drugs to the rest of the developing world. But following changes to India's patent law, can that continue? The main battleground will be over the development of future drugs, as multinational companies begin to re-establish research and development operations in India. The Indian government believes the country's cheap research expertise is what will attract them.
Drug research has become extremely expensive. Now we talk about up to 15 years to put a molecule into marketplace. We talk about $1.5 billion. I mean, that is going to be unaffordable, even not just for poor in India, but even the rich in the USA. And therefore, companies will be always striving to lower costs while maintaining quality and excellence. And I believe India is the destination.
But the head of Cipla, the company responsible for the revolutionary AIDS triple cocktail drug, says against the multinationals, Indian companies will find it almost impossible to compete.
Please understand that a company like Cipla, we invested, say, $20 million in so-called R&D last year. Pfizer invested $7 billion in R&D. How can I compete? Do you know what is the R&D budget of India? India's R&D budget, public sector, private sector, all industries, space, aeronautics, everything, last year was $3 billion. Pfizer alone in drugs last year was $7 billion. Where is, give us a level playing field.
To really compete, some Indian drug companies are joining forces with the global giants. For example, Ranbaxy, a big Indian firm, has teamed up with GlaxoSmithKline. Ranbaxy argues the change to the drug patent law is the best way forward. They ask, if companies can't benefit from their discoveries, where is the incentive?
Are patents important to drug discovery? Well, I think that, at the end of the day, people invest in R&D because they want to get a return from it, and it's a high risk and it's a high return, and therefore you do need that intellectual property in order to generate an incentive to invest in R&D of medicines. So I think it's quite likely that there would not be the sort of breakthroughs of medicines if there wasn't an era of intellectual property protection.
High risks and high returns are obvious concerns for the drug manufacturers. But what about the patients? Financially, they are faced with making huge sacrifices.
We have many patients whose families sell off their whole house or land even to get them treated. Despite the fact that we keep telling them don't do this, because cancer patients you never can be sure whether they'll live or not. If the government does intervene, then they may ensure that drugs prices do not go beyond a certain limit. But whether government will be able to do that or not, we don't really know.
But the government commitment is pretty clear. They will provide low-cost medicines for those that need them.
As far as healthcare is concerned, this country is committed to supplying drugs at affordable prices to the poor. If we can't do that, then we cannot possibly claim to have taken care of the concerns that the poor have.
But those actually working in the health system have doubts about that commitment. India's track record, they say, does not stand up to close scrutiny.
Instead of increasing its investment in health, the government is actually pulling out. The WHO recommended expenditure on health is 6% of GDP. At this point, India spends 0.9% of its GDP on health. This is affecting the poor. How come then the drugs become so expensive that they are not available for the common person? When we are talking of patents and we are talking of product patents, who are the people that we are talking about? Who's going to get wiped out?
There are also those who seriously question the assumed link between the new patent system and the development of new drugs. One of the world's leading authorities on intellectual property says evidence suggests patents do not always lead to breakthroughs. Indeed, he says it's possible they hinder innovation rather than encourage it.
There is a significant academic work showing that in many cases patents may block rather than promote innovation. Patents have become stronger, but in fact the innovation is declining in a very substantial manner. In some cases, sharing of knowledge will lead to more innovation than appropriation of knowledge. If you promote competition, then prices will go down. If you restrict competition on the basis of a patent system, then you have a problem.
Professor Correa also points out big drug companies have to answer to their shareholders. They must make a profit. And that usually means working on drugs people want and can afford.
Clearly, investment by multinational companies in research and development is focused on diseases that affect the rich people. They are not interested in investment in diseases that prevail in developing countries, because there they haven't got a significant market.
What concerns senior health experts is that the change in the drug patent law could have a serious impact on India's ability to deliver on the Millennium Development Goals.
Well, the relationship between the Indian patent law and the MDGs potentially has to do with whether the Indian patent law turns out to have a negative effect on access to low-priced antiretrovirals. If it does turn out to have a negative effect on access to low-cost antiretrovirals, then it will very seriously and adversely affect the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. Because turning around HIV/AIDS and TB and malaria, by the way, is a central and important Millennium Development Goal on which a number of other Millennium Development Goals rest. You can't achieve the education goal if your school teachers are dying of HIV/AIDS faster than they're being trained, as is the case in a number of Southern African countries today.
There's also an issue about the social value of drugs currently under development. Today, It's more about curing baldness or improving sexual performance, because that's what people in rich countries want and can afford. Drugs for killer diseases don't bring in quite so much money.
I think for me it's frightening that 10 or 12 people today are deciding what are the kind of drugs that need to be researched. Because clearly those drugs are being researched not because of their health needs, but based on how much profits they can bring in. That's why you have research money going into drugs for baldness or Viagra. But the last drug for tuberculosis was developed something like 30 years back. When you deny people cars or washing machines, they don't die. When you deny people drugs, they die, and they die in millions.
But the head of Novartis in India points out that his company should not be expected to invest in developing drugs that won't make money.
India has over 35 million diabetic patients, another 35 million non-diagnosed, 70 million patients. And today we do not have heat-resistant insulin, which means insulin cannot be transported into the interior, or if it is transported, it is ineffective. So there has to be encouragement to do some research to make heat insulin. Now, if this is not being rewarded or it's not patentable, nobody will go in that direction, because innovation has to be rewarded.
But regardless of business plans and making profits, India is now going to need affordable drugs like never before. Will they get them?
Please understand what is the disease pattern in India today. There are 80 million cardiac cases, 110 million mental health cases, 60 million diabetics, 50 million asthmatics, 50 million hepatitis B cases. 1 in 3 Indians has got latent TB. The World Bank themselves have said that India by 2015 will have 35 million HIV positive cases, approximately half that in the world. Do you sincerely believe that we can afford a monopoly?
It will take some time before the true effect of this important change in the Indian patent drug law can be properly assessed. It's also a key test for the Indian government in its commitment to providing medical care, especially in the face of an expected increase in the number of HIV/AIDS cases. Meanwhile, though, how to supply those who need low-cost drugs the most is a matter that now hangs in the balance.